Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to discuss about Visit to the Unknown from Tensei Shitara Slime Talk, and so without any ado let's begin. Visit to the Unknown, 04 The Empire's Reasons and Okonomiyaki Part 1. Colonel Gradam looked nervous as he bowed to the person on the other side of the screen. It was Lieutenant General Michel, the highest in command of the Southern Security Force. So it was no surprise that Colonel Gradam was nervous. Not only was Lieutenant General Michel the highest in command of the Southern Security Force, but she was the Governor-General of South City. Before the Great War, this world was separated into 7 cities. The cities were complete sustainable cities that were the product of the best technology of the time. The population was 50 million. The whole world worked together to create this dreamlike robotic utopia. In these complete cities, humans did not need to work. To be precise, under the total control of artificial intelligences, they had a comfortable life guaranteed for them. There was only a small number of people that helped manage the cities and decided the direction they would take. All of the other labor was done by machines. People had the bare minimum when it comes to clothes, food, and shelter, and were also able to enjoy public entertainment. This was promised to all 50 million citizens. However, the entire population of the world was actually 10 billion. Due to a rise in population, the world was becoming oversaturated. There were those who were promised comfort and those who were not. Only a small fraction of those 10 billion would be chosen as residents of paradise. So perhaps it was no surprise that hatred would be born from this difference. The plan to build these cities continued to be carried out by the One World government. But before they were finished, there were those who raised their voices in discontent. They were blind to their own laziness. No, perhaps it was because of their laziness that they despised and hated those who would be allowed to live in the cities. Wars often occurred over small things, when thoughtless people are quick to anger. Faster than the computers had predicted, the environment began to change, and water shortages began to become desperate. The predictions that there would be mass starvation before the rest of the cities were complete started to look like a reality. It was then that it happened. Riots. Those who could not get into the cities began to attack. These riots spread throughout the world, and the flames of violence began to grow and turn to war. And now, of the 7 original cities, only 5 remained. This was the territory of the mechanized empire of Omsbine. Omsbine, the supreme leader of the city's administration, was made emperor, and the surviving citizens were made subjects of the empire who would guard its territories as soldiers. It was the best way to live in this harsh environment. Everyone had agreed to this. The city where the first riot had occurred, it was the last place to be rebuilt as plans had been delayed, and so after the riots, it became the first place to be hit with nuclear bombs. As the rioting citizens had gone deep within the city, the defense system was not able to activate. The other cities were so alarmed by this that they immediately cut off contact with surrounding cities and became independent. Even amongst nuclear war, they were able to survive through their defense systems. Once the war was finished, there was one city that tried to reconcile all the survivors. This city that accepted survivors of the nuclear war for humanitarian reasons, were then attacked by those they tried to save. And the city fell. It was at this point that the mechanized empire of Omsbine decided that they would trust no one outside of their city. This definitive event happened not 1 year after the end of the war. Those who could not live in the cities ended up living in the vast underground shelters. These shelters spread out through the undergrounds of the whole world, but they were not environments where people could live for long. Furthermore, animals who escaped to them mutated into beasts. It was a place that seemed to reject human life. Eventually, the beasts started to evolve to have super abilities, and became too big a threat for humans who were not armed. The humans of this world were on a fast course for destruction. The population that was once 10 billion was now just a few hundred million. And yet the places where humanity could survive were very limited, and it was not enough to house everyone. And so the survivors of this world were forced to fight for the chance of continued survival. It wasn't about what was right or wrong. It was just a base survival instinct. The Governor-General of the 5 remaining cities, that was immense power. In other words, she was the Queen of South City. Her cold blue eyes shone with an unshakable will. Her light blonde hair was cut slightly above the shoulders as if to accentuate her fastidiousness. Beautiful and cool, it was the perfect image to make her subordinates firm believers in her. Judging by her appearance, you might wonder if she was even 20 years old. Had she gained her position through her blood ties? However, Such assumptions would be considered laughable to those who knew her. After all, Michelle was undoubtedly one of the monsters. Her official name was Machinery 4, Michelle. She was one of the strongest of the Empire. Michelle heard the report and sighed. Regardless of how polluted the word already was, using nuclear weapons, the most infamous of the old weapons, was overstepping one's authority. However, her expression did not change, and she hid her anger from showing. We shall consider the possibility that the Resistance have developed new weapons later. So, what have you done since then? Asked Michelle's adjutant, Jejil, as she gave Colonel Gradam a hard stare from the other side of the screen. Jejil was a young woman with a long history with Michelle. She had the kind of sharp eyes that kept men away. Even Colonel Gradam, who was twice her age, became uncomfortable under her stare. Yes. According to the report, they had currently formed a party to pursue them and to search for their base. As for the mysterious weapon, they have been told to capture it if possible. Michelle furrowed her eyebrows when she heard Colonel Gradam's reply. She wondered who they could have possibly sent that could stand against an enemy that killed 3 murder dogs at once. Michelle was against the use of soldiers as disposable objects, and there was no way that Colonel Gradam was not aware of it. In that case, it would make sense to think that he had sent a sizable force. Colonel Gradam. Did you perhaps send the armored troops led by 2nd Lieutenant Carmen? Michelle said as she sat coolly in her chair. Colonel Gradam looked a little surprised. But then he smiled confidently and answered her. Yes. You are very perceptive. Furthermore, 1st Lieutenant Hiragi is continuing the combat analysis, so they should be prepared for anything. Colonel Gradam said with a bow, but Michelle was even more angry now. As the person who was the highest in command of the South Security Force, she knew well the names, abilities, and personalities of her subordinates. When she considered all of it together, the only thing that fit with Colonel Gradam's ability to act was the armored troops. That being said, it was actually the worst possible action in Michelle's mind. Colonel Gradam had said that they were prepared, which was him hinting at the possibility of defeat, yet the problem went further back than that. 1st Lieutenant Hiragi and 2nd Lieutenant Carmen. These two did not work well together at all. It wasn't that they didn't like each other. If anything, it was the opposite. They had very similar personalities and the success rate of an operation went up if they worked together. It might seem like a favorable point then, but the problem was in the process. Just as there had been a report of 2nd Lieutenant Hiragi using nuclear weapons without hesitation, the two of them did not act with any regard towards damage. They only pursued results. Of course, they did make an attempt to minimize casualties towards their own. However, there was no such regard for the enemy. They did not think of the circumstances of others, and only cared about completing the task they were given. 1st Lieutenant Hiragi was obsessed with research and had no mercy when it came to operations. 2nd Lieutenant Carmen was obsessed with battle and pursued victory alone. It was said that when these two teamed up, the battlefield would grow increasingly brutal. Perhaps these were not reprehensible traits for the military. However, Michelle could not make herself like these two. She would even go as far as to say she disliked them. In general, Michelle was against murder. As was clear from the name, Southern Security Force, their purpose was to maintain peace. It wasn't the annihilation of the resistance. They were a part of humanity and may have been their comrades had things been a little different, or so Michelle thought. It was just that their positions had ended up a little different. Of course, as long as the cities had limited capacity, there was no question of letting them in. They would not go down the same path as that city that had been destroyed. And so, in spite of her feelings, Michelle had agreed to all of the operations that her subordinates had submitted. Even if a report came that said nuclear weapons had been used, she did not complain that it was going too far. While she didn't see the resistance as an enemy, they were not friends or allies either. It was only natural for them to prioritize the residents of the city and her subordinates. And, while it was not public knowledge, there were informants within the resistance. Indirectly offering them abandoned food processing plants, having them attack unarmed food storages. They were roundabout ways, but Michelle had done what she could to give the resistance just enough to survive. And now, she sank into her chair and closed her eyes to think. It was not possible that the resistance could have developed a new weapon. There had been no reports from their informants, and the resistance did not have the resources. In that case, could it be someone from the other cities, or was there a laboratory that had survived? It wasn't impossible. but unlikely. No, perhaps. She stopped thinking about the abilities of the enemy and instead tried to predict what would happen from here. First Lieutenant Hiragi was not likely to allow them to escape. In that case, the resistance base might already have been discovered. And with Second Lieutenant Carmen there as well, the place would turn into a battlefield. There were problems with Second Lieutenant Carmen's personality, but it was quite the opposite in terms of combat ability. The armor unit consisted of 5 of their best soldiers who wore powered suits. These cyborgs that had been altered through the power of science, were now even stronger with the help of the powered suits. Among them, Carmen was exceptional. A genius. Stronger even than the murder dogs. It was very likely then that the powerless people in their hiding places would be murdered. I believe that nearly 1,000 live in a single base. So it would not be hard for them to kill them all. Michelle came to a decision after a few seconds of thought. Our biggest priority is understanding the abilities of the mystery enemy. While the resistance are not a threat, we cannot ignore them if they have something that is stronger than a murder dog. Tell First Lieutenant Hiragi to analyze it thoroughly. And tell Second Lieutenant Carmen not to go further than what is necessary. Then Michelle paused for a moment before deciding to make it clear. Colonel Gradam. I will say that it was not wrong for you to send the strongest force at your disposal at the time. However, when going against an unknown enemy, it would have been better to send machine troops which can be replaced. I do not want to lose any more men. Is that understood? Thank you for watching. Like, share and subscribe for more content.